last question for you here. It says, is it possible to divert money currently being overspent on military government contracts so more can go to our men and women in uniform and veterans? Again, this is one of those videos you got a little ahead of me on. But yes, in the restructuring of the federal government to bring down the cost of the budget, the whole concept is to do a ground up evaluation of the personnel and equipment requirements of each department to do their job in accordance with their charters or what they were designed originally established to do. That includes the military. The military has been shrunk down to a level well below where it needs to be, what it should be. I am a definite supporter of President Trump in rebuilding our military. Not necessarily to the size that President Reagan had it at. I loved his military. I was a part of it. Next to, well, let's just say it was the most powerful military this earth has ever seen. The military, U.S. military of World War II was larger, but with the current firepower of our military at the size that President Reagan had it at, that military was more powerful than the entire World War II military was, even though it was smaller. So my focus is a 12 carrier fleet Navy, which means the cruisers, frigates, destroyers, and subs required for 12 carrier battle groups, a 9-regiment Marine Corps, 27 battalions, and with the Navy having the Gator fleet, the naval ships required to support the Marine Corps at that level. In other words, the LHDs, LPDs, etc., to provide us transportation to and from the battlefield. And the support personnel, the air wing, to support that size of a Marine Corps, FSSGs, etc. The Army and the Navy, or the Army and the Air Force, I am going to have, I'm not exactly sure the size of them, of what they need to be. I would rely upon the secretaries of those departments to help me with that, as I do not know the battle structure of neither branch. I know the Navy and the Marine Corps because being a Marine. The process of developing the government at the level it needs to be is a process that evaluates, first of all, the personnel needed. Secondly, the equipment that organization needs for that level. In developing the military to the size it needs to be, and the personnel required. Then you sit down and say, once you've established that, then now you have your budget for that. My focus was on a $600 billion annual military budget. President Trump wants $700 billion. I can conclude with that. I can concur with that, because we need an increase of shipbuilding to bring us up to that level. Due to the inaction of the previous administration, allowing the aging of the ships, the decommissioning of ships without a replacement in the pipeline, our military, our Navy, has dropped to a level that is inoperable the way it needs to be. Same thing with aircraft in both the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps. For the most part, all branches of services are scavenging parts from other aircraft to keep the ones flying that we do have flying. To bring those aircraft up to speed, to bring the ships up to the level we need, tanks, armored personnel carriers, etc., we need a larger budget to increase the amount of production of these items first. The government overspending on contracts. Part of my ideas of restructuring the Defense Department is the reduction of taxpayer dollars spent on government contracts. We already know how much it costs to build a ship. And we're going to put the money into the ship building that needs to be done in order to grow the military to the level it needs to be. There's a lot of waste that goes on in there, yes, and that's in all departments of the government, period. And my plan is, and in my plan, what we do is we cut out a bunch of that waste. One of the things that I've disagreed on, and I've disagreed on this since I was in the military, is how much taxpayer dollars is spent on research and development. We give companies hundreds of billions of dollars to design and build a prototype of a vehicle, whether it's an aircraft, a ship, or a motor vehicle for transportation to meet the needs of what we have. That's not how it used to be done. We used to give out the specifications of a contract and say, this is the vehicle. I'll give you an example, the Willys Jeep. The great Jeep that won World War II. Okay? The government put out a specification, said this is what we need in a vehicle. And several companies developed a prototype on their own of that vehicle and offered it to the government to see which one would pass the government's requirements and get the contract to build it. Today, the government passes out those specifications and said, here's $100 million to develop that project with. Then the government evaluates 2 or 3 or 4 different companies' prototypes and then awards the building contract to that company. That's part of where we lose money at. The V-22 Osprey, the F-35 fighter, those things was supplemented by government taxpayer funds to develop prototypes to be tested. And what happened is they had a deadline. They said, here's your budget, here's the deadline. Well, the company goes out there and spends the money. They don't have a prototype ready, and it's not on deadline. And they said, well, we need this much more money to finish the development of the prototype. We need this much more extension on the time because the prototype is too complicated. And the government just keeps doling out money. Well, if we're going to do that, then I say do this. You said you need $50 million to develop this prototype in 3 years. Okay, there's your $50 million. You have 3 years. If you come to me in 3 years without a prototype and without it being done and ready to be tested, you lose the contract and you owe me both those $50 million back. That's like building a house. Contractor comes in, you give him the plans, he tells you it's going to cost you $500,000 and it'll take him a year and a half to do it in. When you sign that contract for that amount of money, when he comes back to you in a year and a half and says, well, the house is only halfway done, we ran out of money, I need another $100,000 and another 8 months to do it in. No. Your contract was to have it done in a year and a half and at a $500,000 budget. You don't get a penny more out of me, and if you don't have it done, you're fired and I'll find somebody to finish it. So if we take that kind of an attitude with government contractors, you're going to find out that we get things done quicker, on budget, and on time. But at the same time, when the government is providing the research money for these projects, that's part of the reason why there's so many cost overruns and time delays. One, there's no consequences to it, so we need to implement consequences. But the other reason is because the company has no dog in the fight. If we put out the specifications and say, okay, give me a prototype with this ability, and the company itself has to fund the research and development, you're going to find out that the end product will cost less money, will be a better product from day one, and will be in under time. So I'm more of a proponent of that process, that the companies has to put their own money up front to provide me a new rifle, a new aircraft, a new ship, or even a new Humvee that matches the needs of the military. Because when their own money is on the line, they're not going to be wasteful. They're going to want to get it done as quick as possible, and they're going to want to make sure it's right from day one. It's not full of bugs and discrepancies and everything else. Because, see, when they have things full of discrepancies, like the F-35, they had a lot of issues with the electronics. Well, the government kept giving them more money to fix the problem with the electronics. They know they're going to get that. When you cut that out, there's not going to be any problems with electronics from the day one of testing. There's a lot of savings in that. What can we do with that extra money? Well, you mentioned the veterans in that. We see the VA's actually separate from the Department of Defense. So yeah, we could cut the DoD budget based off of that, and we could revert some of that money over to the VA. But that's all a part of the restructuring of the government that I want to do in order to bring the government's budget down. There's other things that can be done to cut waste in the government. One thing that I learned when I was stationed in Charleston, South Carolina. I lived actually about 2 miles south of the Air Force Base. And every so often I see this big black cloud of smoke coming off the end of one of the runways. And a guy I went to high school with actually ended up getting stationed in Charleston while I was there. And I inquired one day, what the heck was that freaking smoke for? And what it is they had a allotment of fuel every quarter. And now the allotment of fuel was for their training flights and also for their mission flights. Now, let's say for example this specific quarter they didn't do as many mission flights as normal. For whatever reason, the Air Force didn't have the need for them to go on missions as much as they normally did. And they used, let's say they had a 10 million gallon quarterly allotment. Well, this particular quarter they only used 8 million gallons instead of 10. Well, what happened you don't need 10 million gallons. So we're going to cut your allotment to 8 million a month or a quarter. Then when the operation tempo got raised, they come up short of fuel, because now their allotment's being cut. So what they would do was they would literally burn the extra 2 million gallons of fuel. So they would show usage of the full 10 million gallons. So their allotment would get cut. Now, I don't know if they still do that or not. But to me, that's wasteful. So what I would like to see done in that case is, and this is a money saving thing. Okay, so this month your flights was reduced over what they normally are. You have a 10 million gallon a quarter allotment, but you only used 8. So this quarter we're going to give you 8 million gallons. That's what you used. So you'll still have your normal 10. And we'll put those other 2 million gallons into a reserve for you. Because you never know, something real world may happen, and they may burn through that whole 10 million gallons in a quarter, and they need the extra 2 or 3 million to get through to the end of the quarter because they're flying more than average, than normal. So we're going to leave them with their 10 million gallon allotment. But since they only used 8 million last quarter, we're going to give them 8 million for this next quarter. But we're not cutting their allotment. We're just taking them back up to their 10 million allotment, and we're going to put that other 2 million gallons off into a reserve allotment. So they have 2 million of them back up in case they should ever have to use it. And if every month it's the same case, they're building up 2 million gallons a quarter in reserve fuel. You save money by not using that fuel, and you don't waste because they're afraid they're going to get their allotment cut. That's one of the solutions. There are literally thousands of stuff like that in the military that we could do. And I hope to be able to address this subject a little more in depth in a later video. And how we can, and government-wide, we can reduce waste and fraud. But again, that's part of my restructuring of the government under the budget, and how to bring the budget down is by doing a grounds-up review of personnel and equipment needed. Now what ships and stuff do we need? That's the equipment. Well, in the military it would be done the opposite base. This is the size of the military we want. This is the number of ships and planes and tanks and this and that and the other. Now, what personnel do we have to do those? And then we fund that. That's the military budget. Now, as for development of new weapon systems, that would be taken into consideration differently or separately. But my biggest thing is I think the companies themselves should have some skin in it, where their money is involved. And you're going to find out that it doesn't quite cost as much to develop a better platform. And in the long run, that means the cost, individual unit cost, will be lower. We can afford to buy more of them because they cost less on an individual basis. I hope this answered all of the questions for everybody. And I do enjoy having these questions because my basic videos are to be about the subjects, basic subjects. And having people bring up questions like these past 10, 11 questions have been, gives me an opportunity to express my opinions on things I haven't even thought of. So, thank you very much for watching this series.